Well, already said, my name is Kurt. I'm glad you're here if you've just arrived. And I'm lead pastor here, and I'm glad to be in Simi Valley. I love it. I love life here. It's been really great. Well, this past week, I had a conversation in our office. We were talking about things that kind of creep us out, kind of creepy, crawly kinds of things. And I'm kind of curious, what are some of the things that you would be afraid of? I'm kind of curious from you guys. What are things that creep you out? Snakes? Spiders? Did you say lawyers? No. Spiders? Cockroaches? Bats? Ooh, bats. Yeah, lizards. Lizards, that's a hard one in Simi Valley. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Height. Yeah. Some people standing up front and talking. That's apparently not mine, I guess. My kids sometimes want me to scare them. So there's not many creepy crawlies that scare them very much, I don't think. But they get scared by kind of classic scary movies, that kind of stuff. And they say, scare me. Especially if we're camping, it was sit around the campfire. They go, Dad, tell me a scary story. And I go, okay, I've got one for you. All right, there once was a man who'd saved all his life, and he prepared, scrimped and saved, put it all in his 401k, had prepared everything and ready. And then he came to retirement, and he went to his investments, and they weren't there. And they were like, Dad, that is stupid. And all the adults are like, that's really scary. They don't ever think that that's very funny. I think it's funny and spooky. Well, so sometimes our things that we are afraid of, they are connected to things we don't know, the unknown things. I moved from a small town to a big city when I was in high school, and I was really scared because my dad was a policeman in that town, and all I heard from that town were police stories. I thought, I'm going to have to join a gang to live. And it turned out that where I was living was kind of like Simi Valley, and so it was not a very scary place. Sometimes our fears are connected to things we actually do know. We know that there are real things. There are things that we fear for in our financial lives, or things that we fear for in our emotional or relational lives. And there are things that we fear for spiritually as well. And the dangers are real, because we live in a real world that has actual scary things. And so what we need to do is we need to be aware of the risk, not be flippant about it, but also not to be paralyzed by it. We know that facing fears is part of real life, of real growth, of actually facing things. Because real faith is courageous. And it makes me think of a couple of verses from 1 Corinthians 16:13 says this, be on your guard, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong. Or 2 Timothy 1:7, for the Spirit God gave us doesn't make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. So faith is courageous because it pushes us to speak when everything in us wants to just be quiet, to act when we want to stay still, or to kind of keep going even when we want to give up, or maybe to stop going when we need to stop. Or it gives us strength even to admit that we're wrong when everything that's in us wants to appear really strong. Faith is immensely courageous, but it's not a question of summoning up the courage so that we can face something. I think it's more helpful for us to think of faith looking courageous because we're people who have let ourselves go on an adventure. We're willing to enter into the adventure of faith. One takeaway, I think, for us from the whole coronavirus thing has been that we know that saying that there's no risk at all is pretty foolhardy, but also if we're allowing ourselves to be paralyzed by all of that risk that's there, also is going to get us stuck. So this morning, I'm not thinking about coronavirus if that's not the main thing. I don't want you to think about that. I'm thinking about a larger view. And this morning, I am talking about wanting to live our lives in a way that we don't dismiss risk, but that we are able to also not be paralyzed by it, to go and live in the adventure of our faith. When we do that, when we go to places where there is fear, we see those things and we have to keep putting one foot in front of the other to do it. And I think you've probably done it in a lot of different areas of your life. I think about we should go on an adventure, and when we think of adventure of our finances, that sounds really scary to think of an adventure of finances, but a lot of you have done that. Maybe you took out a mortgage, which really was scary. The people, when we got our mortgage, the mortgage lender laughed at us. He's like, "You're trying to read every page. Nobody reads every page." But I was so afraid. It was so much money, right? But we can't dismiss the risk to say, this is no big deal. But at the same time, it can be scary, but it's part of the adventure. Maybe you've gone on some adventures relationally, that we know that we have to be able to step out to say hello to somebody new. My kids started a running club recently, and I just had to walk over to another dad and admit I didn't know something that was going on. But they're really great pals now, and we talk with them all the time. For us to take a risk relationally allows us to have friends or relationships. Adventure can even be spiritual as well. Maybe for you're just checking out the faith. You've been here and you're wondering, hey, maybe is this just like a phase I'm going through? Is this just a fad for me? I suppose that's a risk that you're taking. But the benefit that's at the other end is to say, what if God ends up being so real and meaningful to me that you could go on this life of faith with God on this adventure? Today, in the scripture that we're going to be reading, we are invited into an adventure. And saying yes to the adventure is going to look like courage. But if we shrink back from the adventure, it's going to look like fear, giving into fear. We're going to be in Numbers 13 and 14. If you have a Bible that you brought, or on your app, or in the pew in front of you, if you're grabbing one from the pew in front of you, I recommend the blue ones instead. That's the one that we're going to be reading from. If you have got your Immerse Bible that you're reading through, we're going to be on page 226. So Numbers 13 is where we're going to start. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background on that. The first 5 books, they really operate, the first 5 books of the Bible, they operate like a unit. They aren't really completely separate. You can't look at one without knowing some of the context of the other books. There is a promise that's given to a guy named Abraham in the book of Genesis. It says, God's going to give him a place to dwell. He's going to multiply them, and his descendants are going to be this large number of people of faith who love God. But the book of Genesis ends with those people being in the wrong place. They're in Egypt. They're not in the place where God was going to be sending them. And the book of Exodus, just after that, picks up where Genesis left off, and it talks about God taking these people out of Egypt and taking them toward Canaan, toward this land that God had promised them. But the story kind of stalls out. It stops for a little bit. And at the end of Exodus, chapters 19 to 40, and all of the book of Leviticus, and even the beginning of the book of Numbers, it's the people are in front of this mountain of Sinai where God gave the 10 Commandments and all of that. And the Bible gives a big swath of text to that because it's really important to what God's story was for these people going forward. But the book of Numbers, where we have arrived today, it begins right there where we left off. They're at Sinai, but the people are getting ready to go. And Numbers and the book after it, Deuteronomy, are going to take the people from that spot to the edge of the promised land. And in the original language, in Hebrew, the book of Numbers was called In the Wilderness. And that's what we are calling this series that we've got. It's what's on the front of your bulletin today. And I think it's a perfect title for this couple of sermons that we're going to have on Numbers. And I think it really mirrors what our faith looks like. Sometimes we feel like we are in the wilderness. For me, the wilderness is a place where the cover, the kind of protection of life is a little bit thinner. And it's a place where our fears are a little closer to the surface, but also that spirit of adventure is really closer to the surface. I like to camp, and I think about, when I think about adventure, I think of a specific time that I went camping with my family and with my in-laws. And it also makes me particularly happy to think of this story because my father-in-law just passed away a couple weeks ago, and he liked to laugh at me for this story. It was one of his favorites. So when we were camping all together, we would go to this place up in the Sierras, and there was a spot where the road would go away from the campground And it would pass by kind of some, I don't know, like more kind of guerrilla campgrounds. I don't know what to call it. Like not the normal people who camp. It's like the other people, I don't know, who are camping in these places. And then you go up this road and it goes to a really dark spot up above. But you could drive to this summit. And it was wonderful. And even in the summertime, sometimes there would be like astronomy clubs that would go up there and they would host special times where you could go see the stars up there. And we had done that one other year, so this year I brought my a little telescope with me, and I said, I'm gonna go up there, and it's gonna be dark, it's gonna be really cool. I can't wait to go up there and see what it's like. And so I went by myself, and I left in the evening, I don't know, 11 o'clock at night, drove up there, and I passed by these other weird campgrounds, and went all the way up to the top, and boy, it was really dark. Really dark up there. And it was okay. I'm okay. So I get on my car and I get my telescope out and everything's fine. And boy, it is very dark when you turn your car headlights off out there. And you could see some stars. And I thought, this is going to be really exciting. And as I'm up there, you start thinking about, I'm like, you know what? If I got killed right now, all they would find is a shoe. You know, like, nobody can hear me. I'm okay. This is really fun. Like, I like this. This is great. It's a little not okay. And then I heard something, right? And I'm like, Bigfoot? I don't know what. You know, you're like, a bear. I could get eaten by a bear, right? And nothing. And so I start thinking, and my fears started to kind of play a little louder than my sense of adventure in this place. And so I heard the sound, and I got my flashlight, and I shined it over in the direction, and all I could see, two little eyes looking right back at me. It's like, hop, adventure over. Okay, get my stuff back in the car. Okay, hey, I'll see you later. And I get back in my car, and I drive back down the hill, and the whole time I'm kind of laughing at myself, and not entirely, and I thought, yeah, that was, oh boy, that was really fun. And I got back to the camp, and my father-in-law goes, wow, that was really fast. I was like, I saw some eyes in the tree. He goes, it was probably a raccoon. And I'm like, yeah, but I was scared. The question is, will our fears beat out our sense of adventure? I think if I'd had one other person with me up there, I probably would have stuck around. And it would have helped me to do it. The Israelites, they are in the wilderness. And finally, this camp of people that's been out in this desert wilderness for a while has finally started moving. Like they're actually moving a little bit. But before they enter the land, they send out a recon group to go check it out. So read with me. This is in Numbers 13, or on page 226. Now the Lord said to Moses, send out men to explore the land of Canaan, the land I am giving to the Israelites. Send one leader from each of the 12 ancestral tribes. So Moses did as the Lord commanded him. He sent out 12 men, all tribal leaders of Israel, from their camp to the wilderness of Paran. So these are leaders. These aren't just anybody. These are leaders who go out. And a little bit farther down, Moses gave the men these instructions as he sent them out to explore the land. Go north through the Negev into the hill country. See what the land is like and find out whether the people living there are strong or weak, few or many. See what kind of land they live in. Is it good or bad? Do their towns have walls? Are they unprotected like open camps? Is the soil fertile, poor? Are there many trees? Do the best to bring back samples of the crops you see. And it happened that was the season for harvesting the first grapes. So they're sent out to scout some things out and find out what it is, and they're supposed to come back with kind of a list of facts. He said, you're reporters. I want some facts when you come back. And when they give their report, they kind of mostly stick to the facts. Skip down a little bit. If you're in this book, it's on page 227. And I'm sorry, I don't know exactly what verse it is. After exploring the land for 40 days, the men returned to Moses, Aaron, and the whole community of Israel at Kadesh in the wilderness of Paran. They reported to the whole community what they had seen and showed them the fruit that they had taken from the land. This was their report to Moses. We entered the land you sent us to explore, and it is indeed a beautiful country, a land flowing with milk and honey. Here's a kind of fruit it produces. Oh, look, I brought a pomegranate today. My tree, and my pomegranate tree is starting to produce some pomegranates. There you go. Here's some of the fruit that it produces. But the people living out there are powerful, and their towns are large and fortified. We even saw giants there, the descendants of Anak. The Amalekites live in the Negev, and the Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country. The Canaanites live along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea and in the Jordan Valley. So they give mostly a factual thing, but then there's a little bit of fear starting to enter in their report about that whole thing. And so they say, gosh, what should happen next? What should we do? Now, remember, they're being sent by God to go there. I don't know if they're supposed to have a choice. But Caleb tried to quiet the people as they stood before Moses. Let's go at once into the land. To take the land, he said. We can certainly conquer it. So Caleb's trembling maybe, but steps of faith. And the other people, they're going to be paralyzed. But the other men who had explored the land with him disagreed. We can't go up against them. They're stronger than we are. So they spread this bad report about the land among the Israelites. The land we traveled through and explored will devour anyone who goes to live there. All the people we saw were huge. We even saw giants there, the descendants of Anak. Next to them, we felt like grasshoppers. Look at how it talks about how they felt. We felt like grasshoppers. And that's what they thought too. They thought we looked like grasshoppers. Then the whole community began weeping aloud, and they cried all night. Their voices rose in great chorus of protest against Moses and Aaron. If only we had died in Egypt or even here in the wilderness, they complained. Why is the Lord taking us out of this country only to have us die in battle? Our wives and our little ones will be carried off as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to return to Egypt? Then they plotted among themselves. Let's choose a new leader and go back to Egypt. And then Moses and Aaron fell face down on the ground before the whole community. Two of the men who had explored the land, Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, tore their clothing. That means that they're really upset. They said to the people of Israel, the land we traveled through and explored is a wonderful land, and if the Lord is pleased with us, he will bring us safely into that land and give it to us. It is a rich land flowing with milk and honey. Do not rebel against the Lord, and don't be afraid of the people of the land. They are only helpless prey to us. They have no protection, but the Lord is with us. Don't be afraid of them. So, the fear has started to spread through the people. They are afraid. And notice the difference. One of the things that I noticed was the thing that they focus on. Caleb and Joshua, they focus on the blessing of the land, how rich and amazing it is. But the people, the other people, they focus on everything that is scary. They focus on the reason, the hurdles that they have. So instead of focusing on the whole reason why they've been sent in the first place, the possibilities, the other people focus on the hurdles. And not even about how to get past those hurdles. Instead of saying, yeah, they've got fortified cities, that means that we're going to have to build some siege ramps, we're going to have to do some stuff, we're going to have to prepare for how we do that. They say, no, we're going to die. We're going to die, and we can't do this. They have already decided the outcome. And as they go down that track, they start to question everything that's happened before. Why did God take us out of Egypt? Well, why didn't we die before we got here? Let's go back. At least let's choose a new leader. And they've become paralyzed by fear. And that fear has taken them off track of their real purpose. But I think we can even go back a little bit farther than that. On a fundamental level, I think they don't trust God. When Moses was thinking back on this event, in the next book, in the book of Deuteronomy, he talks about this time in this event. In Deuteronomy 31, verse 32, he says, in spite of this, of all the care that God gave you and guided you and protected you, you did not trust in the Lord your God. So when Moses thought back on this thing, he didn't think, there were a couple of different points of view that we had at that time, right? Some of you wanted to stay, some of you wanted to go. Maybe we could have taken a vote. It's not like, hey, how do you like your meat? If you like it well done or you like it a little more rare. It's not like these are valid options. No, one is, will we continue on this adventure of faith and follow God, be with God where he's sending us, or will we shrink back? And are we going to be paralyzed and cower back away from the direction that God is sending us? And I feel like what it is the things that they've experienced didn't allow, they never penetrated deep down into them. Their deliverance from Egypt, the way that God provided for them and that he cared for them and protected them. He told them where to go from step to step. I have a question. I wonder, for us, has God ever protected you, or cared for you, guided you, taken you from place to place? Maybe are those things sinking down in us? What have we learned from that? Because I will tell you, every circumstance, every time we hear God's word, all the times that we respond or don't respond to God, we are either becoming people who are more soft toward God, to look for God in our circumstances, or we're becoming harder and colder toward God. There's not really another option. We're either becoming softer to God or harder toward God. And these people, they've seen some amazing things, but instead of being more thankful, like, God, we've seen some crazy stuff in the past, and this is kind of scary. Thank you for how you're taking care of me now. I am expectant, to be expectant for what God is going to do. God, what are you going to do next? What happens? They complain. They start complaining. In fact, by the time we get to Numbers 13 and 14, everybody has complained. Everybody gets a turn. All the people have complained at some point. Even it mentions specifically some of the foreign people some of the Egyptians who left with them, or other foreign people who are in their crowd who aren't Israelites, who are traveling with them. They complain. It mentions them. Moses' brother Aaron and his sister Miriam, they also complain. They're kind of like, should you really be in charge? Moses himself complains to God. Everybody gets a turn. Everybody is complaining. And that's not even counting some of the mutiny that is to come in the book of Numbers. And I'll tell you what, complaining is toxic. It poisons around us. It spoils good things. It spoils things for other people around us. It spoils us. I think if I turn to complaint, it ruins it for other people, and it starts to ruin me. I was thinking, you could have somebody, it just takes a little bit, doesn't it? It doesn't take very much. You can go, boy, this banquet is so nice, isn't it? The food is amazing. It's a pity they folded the napkins like that, though, isn't it? Right? Just like a little something yucky in there to spoil it a little bit. Now, I want to say godly discontent is important. There is a certain amount of godly discontentment that we can have that's not the same thing as complaining. It says something like, you know what? There are kids out there who don't have enough money to go to camp. What are we going to do? You know what we should do? We should start a thrift shop that raises money to send kids to camp so that they can have kids who can't afford, and they can go and hear about Jesus in a camp setting. That is godly discontent that moves toward action. But complaining it's words that don't have any action. It's like, someone should do something about that thing. And I think complaining is a path toward bitterness, more discontentment, and it leads us to a hard heart. And later prophets in Israel's history looked back at these people and drew a lot of lessons for them, and didn't say, oh, they were especially bad. They said, look at that spirit of complaint that's in us too. We are not immune from it. I realize one of the things that we could take away from the book of Numbers actually is that there's no way to quarantine ourselves from complaining and discontentment. The people are out there all set aside, and they still get dissatisfied. And it's funny because sometimes we think to ourselves, you know what, if only I could see God more visibly, if only God really guided me more audibly, or if I felt his provision, then I would be able to be more faithful. I wouldn't complain as much. But that's not what we see here. These people have been carried along by God. They see a visual representation of God. They see God caring for their needs day by day, and yet there's still complaint. And like I say, I don't want to point fingers at them. I can recognize I am not immune from it. And the only remedy that we have, the only thing that I've ever seen, is gratitude, for us to begin to be people who turn to God in thanksgiving. Now, we can have some compassion for them. They don't know what's going to happen next, right? They don't have the benefit of the books after this. This is life and death. It is scary. They're worried about feeding their kids. They're worried about taking care of people that they love. And they're going to a place that they have never known. And the book after this, the book of Joshua, talks about how they go into the land and what ends up happening there. And we have the benefit of seeing that and to know which way that's going to go. But it's important for us, it's good for us to mention that the story does play out and we get to see it. But we know how it's going to develop and how they do get into the land. But what they aren't without resources. They know what God is like. And they know that God is sending them. So they know those things. And I don't mean to say that it's really easy. They don't know how it's going to turn out. And I know that even in our life, not everything goes the way that we plan. It's not always going to work out. It's not always going to end up just or good. That kind of pain can color the pain that we've had where things don't work out the way that we want or expect can end up coloring us. Think about the way that we see God. And maybe that's what it's been like for you. That's what happened to a writer by the name of C.S. Lewis. He felt like he saw his idea of God getting colored. He said, "Not that I am in much danger of ceasing to believe in God. The real danger is in coming to believe such dreadful things about him." His wife had died, and he started to wonder who God was. "The conclusion I dread is not, so there's no God after all, but so this is what God's really like." And I think a little bit of that is what has happened to the Israelites in their journeying. They question God's motives and what his big project is. And remember, his project is taking them out of Egypt, out of slavery, into this land that he promised them. But there was always going to be the scary part of invading the land. That was always kind of part of it. They knew they had to go into there. In fact, the first chapters of the book of Numbers, it's called Numbers in English because they count people. They do a census in the beginning. And why are they taking a census? To figure out how many people there are to fight. So they know that's kind of part of it. Then just afterwards, they set up their camp in an organized way where they set up in a way and they start to look a little more like a armored camp. And they start to march out like soldiers as they leave from there. So I kind of wonder why they're surprised that it's scary. And the people, they freak out about the spies' reports. And when they do that, they're showing themselves to be not very faithful to this loving God who has carried them on. And they're not remembering the original plan of where they're going. And their weak view of God, actually, is what opens them up to this crouching fear that takes them off track of their purpose. I love that we sang There's Another in the Fire. It helps us face the fear. And we know that God is with us. So God goes, hey, you want more desert? I'll give you more desert. And they end up having to wander for 40 years in the desert instead of going in. And he waits until there's another generation that would be ready to go in and take the promise and make the faithful choice. But it's because that process of walking with God was supposed to teach them something. They didn't learn it. My kids loved listening. My wife read this whole series of books called The Wizard of Oz. You know the one story, but the Wizard of Oz story books, there's actually a whole bunch of them. Frank Baum wrote a whole bunch of them. And there was one book where there was a boy that was given this device that would give him perfect advice. And so he kind of goes through this process of going on some adventures where he learns to listen to the device, and sometimes it gives him advice that's a little hard to discern. He's like, I don't know how that's going to play out. And then, you will see a lady standing in the place, and then he gets there, and then he sees that thing. He starts to understand and to actually think that it really is reliable. And after he had some experiences, he ends up in this kind of dangerous underground caverns, and he needs to escape from there, and there's, lava and monsters and things like that, and he has to get out of there. And the advice that this thing tells him is this. It says, be patient, brave, and determined. And he goes, well, that's not very helpful. I need to know, turn left, turn right. Be patient, be brave, determined. And he was doing pretty well as he's getting through all of these different caverns, and he gets to a place, but he finally gets to a place where he realizes, I can't go forward. This is super scary. It was a big chasm he could never jump over and had lava at the bottom. But he said, I can't go back. And now I'm stuck here. What do I do? And he remembers the device, and it tells him, be patient, brave, and determined. And he's able to trust the words of that thing because he had had enough experience with it. And he sits down and thinks, and an opportunity comes available to him because he was patient and waited bravely and was stuck with his determination. God has been investing in us. He's a reliable source that has been whispering to us and telling us where we're supposed to go. We know that we're going toward his perfect kingdom, but there are even some things in the near term where God is taking us. We, as a community here at Simi Cov, we want people to be connected to God in new and deeper and wider ways, so deep and wide that they're able to handle everything that comes at us. We know that life's going to throw us some stuff. We want our church to be a place where we're connected in community to each other, right? Where nobody feels left out or left behind, where we get connected. Nobody's on the sidelines, but we're connected together in a community. Where you get to serve around us, to use your skills and your talents to help people who are disconnected, maybe even disconnected from our church body out in the community, to feel like those people have our faith touch their real life. And basically, God is taking us where the good news of the gospel shapes us, shapes how we work together, shapes our community around us. And that blessing would be, if we could live into that, that would be an amazing dream. It would be wonderful. It's like going into the promised land. It's like getting that thing that we all long for and want. And I got to tell you, that's the kind of community I really would want to be a part of. That's a place I would want to invite my friends to be a part of, to enjoy that kind of thriving, growing kind of life. And we can embrace that as an adventure, or we can look at the scary things that it would take to get there that would block us and be paralyzed by that. Because I got to tell you, that kind of life, that promised land life, there are some things that will block us to get there that are scary. When I think about it, there are some real challenges. There is some real opposition around us. I think that faith in general is eroding in our world. There's kind of hostility to spirituality in some places. It's especially difficult when things that we want to value are different than cultural norms. I think not just about opposition, but there's distraction. I'm distracted. I'm always entertained, and it's easy for me if I'm distracted to get sidetracked from where I need to be going. There's temptation. We can be tempted. It's easy. I can't see the blessing that God has for me. I know that it's something deeper and more wonderful, but a lot of times it comes at the cost of obedience for me to get to that place, and I have to fight through that. It's the same reason why I don't do very well at the gym, right? My son says, look, Dad, I have a six-pack, you do not. And it's because I'm not willing to resist enough of the temptations. That's part of the problem. There's some costly obedience that would take for me to get there, and more time and effort than I'm willing to give. Another thing that's in our way would be division. I think we can ask ourselves the question, will we value unity together more than any of the pressures in our community to separate or to go in different directions? I think political division is a real risk, not just for us, but for all churches. I did not talk to Jay about him reading that passage today. I think it was perfect to talk about how good and pleasant it is when we dwell together in unity. So there are real challenges for us if we think about what would it mean for us to be this kind of community that is like this. I think for us to think about our kids to grow up to be vibrant adults who love the Lord, for us to be welcoming of new people who come in who never met the Lord before, those things can seem like scary giants out there in front of us. But we can embrace the adventure of the life of faith. And the reason why we can do that, is because you and I, we have had some experiences with God. I know that we can learn to trust him. And we know that the God that we have doesn't just say, I need you to do stuff for me, but he says, I'm going to go with you. who knew that the covenant that he had made in the Old Testament wasn't too weak or that there was something broken with it, but he knew that his people were weak and that his people had problems. They were the ones who were deficient. Last week, the missionary Tim Smith, he quoted Hebrews at the end of Hebrews 11, and a couple verses later, Hebrews 12:2, it says this, "For the joy set before him, he, Jesus, endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart." And if we're weary or if we are liable to lose heart, we should look to Christ. Moses and this whole generation of Israelites, they came right up to the edge of the promised land, and they looked and they shrank back in fear. But Christ, because of the joy set before him, he went to that place and he entered into the promised land. He went there, and he's the one that we follow. I think if Caleb and Joshua seemed really brave, they were. Look at Christ. He knew his mission. He knew that his mission wouldn't just be the risk of dying, but his mission actually was at the cost of him dying. To bring us, these people who keep complaining and keep having all this fear, and to take us and bring us into the kingdom of God. So what does that mean? What do we need to do? I think what we need to do is we need to change the way that we view our faith life, the way that we view our church life together. Maybe you have gone on a tour in the past. I lived for 6.5 years in the city of Strasbourg in France, beautiful place. And where I lived, it was right on the Rhine River, and there were lots of river cruises that would come through. I really recommend it. Everybody who did it told me they were amazing. They loved it. And these cruises would come into town, and what was amazing is that people would come out and they would have a tour guide, and the tour guide would show them all the places. The people didn't have to interact, and they were safe. It was super convenient. They got to stay with their friends throughout the day. They didn't even have to know where they were going. They just kind of had to follow this tour guide wherever they were going. And in the evening, they would go back to their boat, get fed, go to the next city. And it was easy. It was safe. It was convenient. And I think that a lot of times we expect our church to fit that same kind of mold. The pastors and the church board are kind of like tour guides who take us from place to place. All you have to do is just stick with the group and just go wherever they tell you to go, right? With a tour, you end up with some nice Instagram photos. Maybe if you just kind of go along with the tour at church, you can, have a nice thing to put on a tweet, or you can have like something inspirational. It'd be really nice. But at Simi Covenant, we know that life as a church isn't just a tour. It's an expedition into some new territory, and territory that we have never gone to before. Nobody has. We're all going into it in a fresh way. And all of us are expected to play our part. Now, we have been on some adventures before, so we're not strangers to adventure, but we've never been to this exact place with these exact circumstances. But you know what we do know? We know God's character, and we know that he is sending us. So we need to go, even if there's some scary stuff up ahead. We have to face our fear, so we need to go, even if there's some scary stuff up ahead. We have to face our fear. And when we think about the things that are there, our fear response can come up in us. We think, that is scary. We end up like Kurt on the top of a mountain, ready to freak out and turn around and go back. But maybe you need to be ready to take some steps. Maybe you need to take a spiritual step. It's scary to think about taking a spiritual step. Maybe you can do this exploring faith class that we're going to do up ahead and say, maybe, am I really in? And maybe this is what I want to do. Or maybe you can decide, I'm going to make faith discussion a part of our family dinners with the people, whoever you're sitting around the table with in the evening, and say, occasionally we are going to talk about a piece of scripture or something. It's a faith spiritual step. Maybe you could take a step financially. Say, hey, I'm a part of this church. This is where I am. To say, choose to participate financially in the church. And you know what? That takes some guts. Because you go, but what if? To participate in the life of the church in that way. To take a step of service, or even worse, responsibility for things. It's terrible. To say, I will, okay, fine, I'll do that thing. To take that step feels really scary. But maybe you can do it in faith. To come with us to serve, we're going to do something with Action in Ventura County coming up, where we're going to serve some of the underprivileged in our area. That's a great way to do it. Maybe you can help out with something around here, to lead a moment of prayer, or if there's something that you feel like you should initiate, maybe that's what God is calling you to. Maybe even just reach out to your neighbors. And maybe you need to take a relational step. I think if you were married, you began your married life by saying, we're going to do whatever comes together. We're going to stick together. It's going to be great. And then life happens, and you're like, this is not all completely great. But what does it mean for us to see those things that are real? We've scouted the land now, and you say, this is real, but what does it mean for me to go forward with God with me? What does it mean for me to say, I can't go back now, so how can I face these scary things with God's strength? Or to be in a community of friends, to be a part of a church of people who don't all vote the same way as you, that we do things a bit differently, that there is a temptation for us and for all churches going forward, I think, to separate on ideological lines, to be with other people who kind of don't ever say anything that bothers us. Wouldn't that be nice? Oh, that'd be so nice. Right? We want to do that, but that's not what the kingdom looks like. The kingdom is us being together in our differences. The thing that unites us is not that we have the same balance in our checkbook, we have the same background, that we even were born in the same country, but that we all have the same Lord. And that's what connects us. And you know what? It's going to be hard sometimes to do that. It was easier for unity before you knew what people wrote on Facebook. Right? But it is messier, it is scarier to enter into those relationships when we do know. But you know what? That's the promised land. It is how good and pleasant it is when people dwell together in unity. I think that is going to be a battle that is scary, that makes us want to run, but we should go into to be together. Because the opportunities are amazing. It's going to be good for you personally. It's going to be good for your people. And it's going to be good for anybody that comes in contact with you if you do that, because we can do it. What's up ahead for us as a church and as people, as disciples, we don't totally know, but it is an adventure. And we don't know exactly what the territory is going to look like, but what I do know is that God is with us. And we know that He has sent us to do it. The question is, we're looking forward to the next 30 years, people who are after us here at this church, to say, God has an adventure for us. Will we head in that direction? Will we step forward in faith, or will we crouch in fear? Let's pray. Lord, we ask you to give us a fresh vision of who you are. Not that I need to build up a bunch of courage in myself, because the stuff is scary, and I've seen that I chicken out at times. But I need a fresh vision of who you are, to know you are with us and that you really have sent us to do these things, to proclaim necessary truth, to help people to see who you are. We have good news to proclaim in our community, good news to live out, not only to other people, but even with the people who are here that we have differences with. Help us to go face those scary giants, we pray, and to do it to your glory. In your name, amen.